Transitioning now, shifting gears to Liquid City, okay? So for the last 3 months, I've had the pleasure and I don't know, I call it an honor to work with these guys. So their team has been spread out all over. A bunch of them are in the UK and elsewhere in Europe. We'd have our weekly Tuesday morning 8:30 calls that are near and dear to my heart. I'm not sure if we're gonna have those after Summit. I don't know. We'll figure that out, okay? So this was kind of what it looked like, all right? Behind the scenes just a little bit. We told them, hey, we're gonna have 6 wave spots located here at the location. Can you work with that? And they're like, how about 20? Can we do 20? 20 VBS points? And we're like, well, how about 12? And they're like, well, how about 20? I was like, okay, maybe we can squeeze in 15, right? And they said, hey, we found a way to get 20. I think we're gonna do 20. And to me, this really embodied the spirit of developers and just creative technologists that have a vision, trust in their team, believe in the tools, and that they can pull off crazy stunts. So today, when you scan this QR code and bring up your Liquid City Reality Channels demo app, I want you to know that so much passion, love, and trust, was put into this from the Liquid City team. So thank you so much. Introducing now Keiichi Matsuda to bring on his team and start off the talk. So thank you, everybody.
What a great intro. Thank you very much. That's really nice. Hi again. I'm Keiichi Matsuda. Thank you very much, Joe, for the amazing intro and all of your team's support during the production of these experiences. So I'm a designer, I'm a filmmaker, and I'm director of a company called Liquid City. We're a small design studio based in London. And we are small, but we have a deep expertise. We've been thinking about the future of XR for a long time. I made my first AR film back in 2009, and that's around the same time that my colleague Anna over here started developing her incredible graphic novel called Square Eyes about the future of augmented reality as well. And we've also all been working in companies developing AR wearables as well. So it's really our passion, and it's something that we'd be doing even if nobody asked us. But now the technology is really starting to arrive, and the work that we're doing has started to feel much less speculative and much more real. And Niantic, as you see, are building the foundations to make these kinds of worlds possible. So we're trying to imagine how it's all gonna look in the future. And we do that through focusing on the user experience of augmented reality, trying to think about how the technology might change our lives in the future. What's it gonna feel like? Sorry. How are we gonna interact with it? And how's it gonna fit into our lives and into our societies? So we set out to explore the possible futures of the real world metaverse from the perspective of user experience. Many of you here today are building apps and experiences yourself, and we want you to walk away from this talk with a better understanding about how they may all fit together in the real world metaverse. And if this work inspires you or you're interested in it, we'd be really pleased to connect with you during this event and hear what you think about it. And I think we might have some time for questions at the end if you have any. So I want to first talk about the app model. We have this idea of the mobile app where you have this grid, you press on the button and it opens up and it fills your whole screen, and you use one app at a time and you switch between them depending on what you want to do. But how should apps work in the real world metaverse? Should they take over your entire world, or do you imagine them more like objects that exist within the world? Do you want to be able to interact with them one at a time, or do you think you should be able to have them coexisting within the world? And should they be made by individual creators, or do you imagine them as being collaborative and collaborating with other people to build these worlds? Probably all of those different things should be possible. And we might need even different categories of apps to be able to imagine how this works. But the main takeaway here is that the way that we think of an app is going to have to change as we start building for the real world metaverse. You might have heard this term used by John in some of his articles in the past, the idea of reality channels. And in his article from last year, he talked about Pokemon Go as a reality channel. And you could imagine Peridot as a reality channel, but equally you could imagine Wikipedia or LinkedIn as a reality channel as well. And in that way, you could switch between them like we do with apps today. This idea kind of really resonated with me because I had a similar thought back in 2010 when I released my film Augmented City 3D. And here you see this character who's walking down the street, and you can imagine that there are reality channels all around him with tons and tons of different content, way more than you can possibly see at once. So you need to have some way to be able to organize and filter them. And in this film, we've got this UI element called the channel browser that allows you to be able to select from all of those different reality channels the layers that you want to be able to see. And as you do that, you define a view of the world which is really uniquely yours. In this case, it's architecture, Georgian architecture, flowers, and street art. But we also wanted to think about the wider implications. Of course, this is one way of organizing content in the real-world metaverse, but there are many others. So what happens in a society where everyone's living in their own little bubble? So to help us think through those possibilities, we considered 3 variables. Firstly, sharing. Do we want to live in a world that's completely customized just for us, or do we want to live in a world that's shared by everybody? Discovery. How are we going to know what content is around us, and what is the mechanism to uncover it? And finally, agency. Do we want full control over everything we see, or are we happy to let an AI or an algorithm decide what our world is going to look like? And also, when we think about agency, we should also think about who has the right to add to and edit the world around us. We're basically talking about the organizing principles for a shared reality, which is very complicated and difficult to think about, but because we're designers, we always bring it back to the people that are going to be living in that world in the future. And so we developed some stories of people living in those worlds, and I want to introduce Anna, a designer and art director at Liquid City, to take us through those stories. Hey, Anna.
Hello, everyone. So this is our first story. It's set in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Gilles is a freshman. He's just starting college. He's got a new set of glasses. He's in a new town, and he's really excited to explore the campus. So in this story, he can play games that can transform the whole world all around him. He also joins a skating community and spends time hanging out in that channel. As you can see, the whole city has been marked up by other skaters with tricks and tips and other challenges. Finally, he decides to get involved, and he makes a project of his own. He adds it to a channel, and he's really pleased to see other people start to hang out in his work, and everyone's adding and remixing content together.
Great. So can you tell us a little bit more about the reality channels and how they're organized?
Yeah, so this is probably the most straightforward model that we explored. It's very similar to how you were describing the mobile app system before. So it's one channel at a time, which can take over the whole world.
Yeah. I can imagine it would be really fun to be living in a channel, in a community like this. In this kind of organizational model, the augmented content can be highly creative, and people can really build whatever they want and collaborate within channels as well. But it's also quite exclusive. People are living in these different versions of reality, so you have to be able to be kind of in the know to be able to participate. And also discovery could be difficult. There might be some amazing content nearby, but you'd never know about it. And unless you're in the same channel with somebody else, it's very difficult to know what kind of reality they're seeing. So in this way, these kind of reality channels can bring people together, but they could also isolate people from each other if they're in different channels. So what if we imagine something different, a world where everything is shared?
Yeah, so this is our next story. It's set in East London, and it's a single shared reality. So everyone experiences the same thing together, but it has virtual content that's bounded to exact physical locations. So the model basically follows how we already set up land rights in the physical world. If you own the physical space, then you get to determine both the physical and virtual experience that's for everyone who visits. So in this story, our character Sadia is walking along a high-end fashion street, and as she crosses boundaries between different properties and different stores, a whole different world springs up around her. And some of them could be really beautifully crafted and could be perfectly tailored to that space. But some could be low quality, or they could be really poorly maintained. And of course, it also could bring some of the difficulties of physical property rights into the virtual realm, some people being able to afford what could be expensive land rights, and some people just being completely cut out. So in our story, Sadia's community have managed to band together and gain the virtual rights over their unique neighborhood in order to celebrate their culture.
Yeah, so like the last one, this model also allows for lots of control and customization from the creators. And because people are building for very, very specific locations, it's also likely that that's going to be very relevant to their context. So in the story, you saw this augmented festival at the end, which we kind of imagine could become a tourist destination in its own right. But this model is also kind of unfair. You know, there's no reason to think that some landlord is going to be able to create the best experience for a space. And you can see that in the example of this kind of unclaimed alley, which is just filled up with junk. And if you don't own or have access to any of this virtual land, then you're also locked out from contributing. So could we imagine something a bit freer and more democratic?
Yeah, so we explored that in this next story. So it's set in a ramen shop in Tokyo, and the restaurant owner, Jun, is preparing for a busy lunch rush. So similar to the last story, this is a default universal channel, so it's shared by everyone. But in this case, anyone can post any content they want and anywhere and anytime. The business owner has no special privilege at all. To stop everything getting really overcrowded and super cluttered, we imagined that we would impose some limits. So things like a size limitation on content. So you can only post something that's a maximum of 2 feet by 2 feet. We also thought about a time limitation. So inactive AR content begins to fade away after an hour, and that allows the physical world to reemerge. So in this scene, you can see that strangers have got together to play games in the queue for lunch. And over in this corner, some locals are helping some tourists to plan their afternoon. What's really exciting about this version of the world is everyone sees what everyone else is doing. You can see what activities people are engaged with. And discovering and joining an activity is as simple as in the real world. You just see it. So it's a really vibrant scene. It's got this good sense of shared community, but of course there's lots of difficulties here as well. So this businessman needs to review an important work document. So we came up with this idea of a pocket, which is a notebook-sized zone of personal privacy. And we also thought that a refresh mechanism would be good to allow for popular or really useful content to stay for longer. So for example, Jun's menus, he needs them to linger around. He probably needs to be able to refresh them several times during the day. And over here in the far corner, some messy students have left virtual clutter all over the table, which might not be interesting or relevant to the next person who wants to use it. So we also thought maybe a defresh mechanism, so you can be able to make the content fade away more quickly.
So this kind of mechanism of refreshing and defreshing hopefully allows relevant and interesting content to come to the top and for the other types of content to fade away over time. But obviously in this model which is shared, there's lots of restrictions around what kind of content you can have. It can't be too huge, it can't be too resource intensive. But there's something really nice about living in this world where everyone's experiences are public by default. You get this kind of automatic sense of community and connection between people. But as with any shared space, there's always going to be a degree of compromise when you're living in those worlds together. We have to be considerate of other people. So what if we considered the opposite approach and imagined a world where you have a reality that's curated just for you?
Yes, so that's exactly what we explored in our last story here. So this is Susie's worldview, and her world is just perfectly curated for her by her AI, which over many decades has learned all of her habits and her routines and her preferences, and it only serves her the content that is personally useful and relevant at exactly the same place and at the perfect time. So in this case, it's pre-ordered for her, her usual coffee at her favorite coffee shop, just in time for her to collect it as she's on her way to work. On the other side of the street here, a local bookshop is offering her the next book in the series that she's enjoyed. So you can see that her view of the world is very smooth, it's very convenient, it's really uncluttered. But in fact, in our story, Susie's life has changed quite a lot. So her son left for college, and she moved to Denver after a breakup. And she realizes that even though some really important parts of her life have changed, her AI keeps kind of nudging her to live in the same old way and to live in the same old routine. And she starts to feel that maybe she's ready for something new. So she begins to edit her settings and suddenly sees a multitude of different lives that she could be living.
So in this world, everybody lives in a slightly different version of reality. There are no shared moments by default, and you can never really know what somebody else is experiencing. But it is very convenient. Discovery is all handled just by the system, and if the system's doing its job right, we might imagine that there's not really much need for conscious input from Susie at all. But that convenience is a double-edged sword. Of course, now you have this algorithm that's defining your entire view of the world, so we really have to make sure that we trust the company who develops that algorithm. Thanks very much, Anna.
Thank you, everyone.
Writing these stories showed us how different everyday life in the future could be, depending on how we decide to structure and organize the content in the real-world metaverse. We presented 4 of these kind of separate outcomes, but in reality, we can imagine that there are infinite different combinations and ways of nesting them together. But we think it's really helpful to think of these and try to make us think about what kind of reality we actually want. We made a little website that you can access and read the stories in full length and explore the scenes, and yeah, hope you enjoy that. These stories all started their life in a workshop that we did with Niantic, and we collaborated to imagine a huge different range of spectrum of use cases, and then we took all of those use cases and put them in real-world locations and assembled them together, and then we also imagined characters who might be living in those futures and what they might be trying to achieve. And as part of that exercise, we also imagined the conference of the future, the Niantic Lightship Summit that's going to be kind of draped in these different reality channels. But we believe that if you want to understand something, it's really important that you prototype it. So we built a little slice of the real-world metaverse right here. You're now surrounded by these reality channels that we built just for this event, and I want to introduce Jasper, designer and technical director of this project from Liquid City, to introduce the different reality channels available.
Hi, everybody. So as Kei mentioned, we've built 5 channels for this event, and each has its own content, aesthetic, and function. This is the first channel. It's the navigation channel. This is for helping you find your way around the summit while you're here for the 2 days. You can see what's happening now and next in each room. And out on the terrace, there's a large schedule which shows all the events that are coming up over these 2 days. Everything that you see in here is being updated in real time as the summit progresses, and it's presented in this minimal graphic spatial style that's hopefully really easy to follow. This next channel is the Sights channel. It's perfect for getting to know San Francisco, whether you're new to the city or maybe an old-timer looking to discover something new. Just by looking over the balcony outside, you can get information about these local landmarks. And on the inside of the conference, we have some details about food and drink that's been provided by local suppliers. In the future, we can imagine that a channel like this would be able to give you context and suggestions wherever you might be in the world.
Don't know if you got that, but there's signs over the coffee,
Yeah,
food and drink that show you where that's from and some other information.
This is the Summit channel. It's a spatial installation that's been tightly woven into the physical architecture of this venue. So while you're traveling through nature in all seasons here, you can take photos in special photo booths that we've set up outside that allow you to actually share these photos to walls inside the conference so that other conference goers can see your photos. You can also look out for little creatures that inhabit this world, and we may have hidden 1 or 2 secrets in here. This channel is the Stickerverse. It gives you the ability to place stickers anywhere on any physical or virtual surface that you can see, and you can see stickers that have been placed by other people. You can use this channel to leave messages, make suggestions that you think people should be looking at, or perhaps contribute to some collaborative creations. Much like the Sites channel, we think that a channel like this could have a really vibrant life outside of the summit. The final channel is a behind-the-scenes look into how VPS is enabling this whole experience. It shows every POI that we have as a mesh, and you can see which POI you've been localized against. You can see here, this is an active POI, and it has,
Yeah, so you can view these channels using the Reality Browser, which is this experimental app that we made just for this event. Jasper's now going to take us through some of its development.
Sure. So from the start, we knew that we really wanted this experience to be hyper-local. AR enables us to make virtual content that responds to the physical world wherever we are. But VPS gives us the ability to tie specific virtual content to specific physical places. And this allows content to be bespoke and relevant in a way that hasn't really been possible before. So we wanted to make something that you couldn't experience anywhere. In fact, like a building, it only made sense exactly here. Thinking about this project like a building was actually really useful for us, since all three of us have a background in architecture. So we've spent years making bespoke contextual spaces that fit in the physical world. We used architectural tools like plans, sections, scale models, and schematic layouts to always be thinking about what we're doing at scale and in context. And we also did some collaborative design sessions in VR using tools like Gravity Sketch. And these allowed us to all get into the space together at one-to-one and position the world with our own hands. All of these tools together allowed us to fill this huge venue with contextual content from start to finish. It was really like building a second building inside and on top of the first one with its own set of program and circulation. But designing for this huge space was only really half the challenge. We also needed to extend VPS to work at such a large scale. Natively, VPS will localize against a single POI, and it will be tracking you accurately within about 5-meter radius. So to span the 100 meters of this venue, we had to build a custom system on top. It's continually looking for any one of these POIs that you see, and will adjust the world relatively to fit when one is found. So throughout this project, we've found that testing at scale has been really critical. And so once we had this system set up, we were actually able to set up multiple testing grounds for ourselves across the world. We used the furniture in our studio as a set of POIs to test up-close things like visual development, occlusions, and interactions. And the street outside our studio in London happened to be exactly the same size as the venue. So we were able to test drift and relocalization over long distances. But maybe most importantly, the street allowed us to walk through what we were making regularly and get a sense of the space, the scale, and the flow of this world that we were building. We could look up at our virtual vistas and say hi to our little critters, even though we were thousands of miles away from here. We also did a little bit of remote testing in the venue itself. So we sat on Zoom at midnight as some brave Niantics explored our channels and found everything that was broken. From the architecture work we've done previously, we know that bespoke physical installations never go exactly to plan. And so we assumed that a virtual installation would be exactly the same. So to ensure the success of this project, we built everything in a way that allowed us to make last-minute changes on site. So we've been here all weekend with the event team, loading in everything in parallel, making our own tweaks and adjustments as all the furniture and decoration came in. And this flexible approach has been especially necessary given how last-minute a physical event can be. So almost none of the physical decorations that you see around you were finished until yesterday. So for us to have some static features that we could use as POIs from before the event even started, we had to add our own physical augmentations into the space. Happily, VPS supports any geometry at all, and that includes flat things. So we made a set of unique custom graphics that we could put in to activate spaces. So any of these blue patterns that you see around you, you can take your Reality Browser out, localize against them, and you'll see the channels all around you. Like Kei mentioned a little earlier, we believe that reality channels can coexist and intersect with each other. Reality Browser application we've made allows you to turn these channels on and off. So you can see here at the bottom these UI toggles. You can switch these channels on and off one by one to allow you to look at the content and features in each. Or maybe you can try to blend them and look for these special moments where everything perfectly overlaps and you get a little glimpse of the future.
Great. Thanks, Jasper.
Enjoy it.
So what you see here with these kind of reality channels is a similar organizational model to what you saw in Gilles's story. Jill was able to switch between different reality channels, from the sort of noir detective story to the community-driven skateboarding channel. Here we have 5 channels, and the UI just about works, but the real-world metaverse might have hundreds or even thousands of channels. So discovering those and being able to organize and manage those is a major issue. The browser would have to solve this and do so without taking up too much of the user's time and attention. And that's a design challenge that we are yet to solve, but hopefully developing this gets us some of the way towards it. So yeah, please try it out. You can localize wherever you see the patterns and then just walk around and explore the different spaces on the terrace and the different rooms. And please take lots of photographs and post them. It's just only here for this event. And yeah, we're also going to be running some tours. We'll be over there in Embarcadero if anybody would like a guided tour of the little slice that we've built. This whole thing is kind of a live experiment for us to try and build something that really pushes the boundaries of what's technically possible, and then just to see how that feels. It's really a prototype, but hopefully it gives you a good feeling of what a whole world of reality channels might feel like. And we learned a lot from developing both the experience and the stories in parallel. Firstly, we're moving to a new way of thinking about apps. They're not just portable tools that you carry around in your pocket, but they're entire worlds that you can step inside and walk around in. And in these kind of worlds, interoperability, contextual awareness, and user-generated content are going to be a really big part of the mature real-world metaverse of the future. Also, the development process of this is very unusual. It's lots of new tools and new skills, potentially combining skills from different disciplines. So you need to be prepared to experiment. And finally, defaults really matter. Should things be public by default or private by default? Do we want things divided up into plots, like in the festival story, or more democratic, like in the ramen shop? Do we want to switch our channels manually, or are we happy for a system to take care of that for us? These different variables and tweaking those and adjusting them lead to radically different experiences of the future. So you could say in a way that the defaults are kind of an expression of values. And that's where everything starts to become quite subjective. You know, people in the future are going to be having these different aims, and they'll be wanting different things. And in many ways, it makes sense to have everybody living in their perfectly curated individual reality. But can we really call that the real world? It's very nice for us to be here in person in San Francisco. Sorry to everybody at home. But you know, to speak to you in person. I did a couple of talks in Zoom over lockdown. I don't know, you probably participated in some of those as well. And there's just so much that's missing. You know, when I come to one of these events, the whole point of it really is to be able to meet new people and discover new things. And ultimately, the real world isn't just a backdrop for your daily life. It's about, you know, your shared places and your shared memories and being able to connect with each other. It's about creating this place for exchange, to be able to have to encounter new people and new experiences as well. And from our perspective, that's what the real-world metaverse has to be. But we'd really love to hear from you about the things that you want to build and what your vision of the future is as well. So we've really enjoyed building these experiences for you. Please come and see us and let us know what you think. Thanks very much. Do we have time? For a few questions, if there's anything from the audience. Yeah, we've got one down the front.
So the question is, how are you considering the idea of persona in the context of creating personalized experiences in the channel? Like gaming persona versus like business persona?
Sure, yeah, that's very interesting. So the question was around how we think about persona, how people, I guess, are perceived within that world. Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question because I suppose, it comes down to permissions as well, right? Like how you want to express yourself. And I think we can imagine that half of the real world metaverse is about how we aggregate these different realities together, how we perceive the world. But maybe the other half is how we broadcast, how we express ourselves out into the world. And I guess through social media, we see that there's actually a huge amount of different ways that you can do that. And I guess the real world metaverse is no exception to that either. This is something that we would love to explore a bit further. We've been concentrating much more on the aggregation part of it, but the broadcast bit is equally as important. Yeah, hopefully you'll see some more work from us coming soon to deal with it. That's not really an answer, sorry. Any other? Oh yeah, over there. Hello. Yeah. Yeah. Sure, yeah. So the question was around sharing and how we imagine, the ability to share on this very individual level. I think within this talk, we've really been focused on the defaults, right? Like what happens when you set the default and then that's the kind of assumed behavior across the whole world. But of course, on top of that, there's an ability to adjust things on a more kind of micro level. So it might be that I would, have an experience that is, maybe private by default, but I want to share it with somebody locally. Maybe there's some kind of UI in that allows me to share this specific experience. But when we walk through the augmented city of the future, we imagine that there's going to be all of this content everywhere. And so it's thinking about how people want to share, overall within their reality to us is really the interesting thing. But yeah, absolutely, you should be able to share, an individual experience as well. Yeah. Okay, we'll go over here, sorry.
Was there anything in the summit reality that was too ambitious that you had to cost last minute?
Yeah, it was very difficult because, the team is very enthusiastic and they want to put more and more in. And we had this idea that we wanted to show off this concept of reality channels. So we were like, okay, what about a channel for this, a channel for this? You know what? I think we pretty much got all of it in. It's pretty crazy. Was there anything that we missed? I mean, the stretch goal was definitely the food, right? The tea and coffee and like all of the snacks and being able to see the source. I think there was one idea that we would be able to like connect with some local like bakery or something like that and have some very specific thing that we could bring in and show the whole story of how that was made and then actually link it back to that physical location. But I think for us, if we were going to develop and extend this project, which I hope we do, we want to see it on wearables. And we want to see it on Web AR as well. Those kind of things will be really incredible. Yeah. All right. That's all I got. Thank you very much.